What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. The news has been nuts. Let's hop right into it. So first, we have a tweet from Guillermo saying that the Vercel support agent is now handling 90% of customer inquiries without human intervention. However, shockingly, they've been unable to upgrade to Opus 4.6 from 4.5 without measurable performance and customer sentiment degradation. The best model is a moving target, bullish on AI gateways and OpenAI SDKs. And then the winking face, obviously speaking to the Vercel AI gateway. I thought this was really interesting. My colleague who actually was communicating with their Vercel support chat said that it was actually quite good and quite helpful, which is interesting. I haven't really had to make a Vercel ticket lately, but when I did talk to the Stripe support chat, for example, their AI one, I'm really disappointed in it. I know Stripe is very esoteric and there's a lot of different features and products and moving pieces, so it might be a bit harder than Vercel system, which is probably more documented. But it's interesting, kind of speaks to what some of the commenters were talking about as well, where 4.6 isn't as good as 4.5. People were even saying Sonnet 4.6 isn't as good as 4.5. It's interesting as well how they must have benchmarks internally for customer support that they measure it against, and also I guess some A/B testing with customers, so that if the sentiment goes up or down. But pretty interesting, and AI support is cool and definitely helps alleviate a lot of problems for the support team, and it also helps you determine which problems aren't being solved by people and which can have better docs or better explanations or even possible feature improvements. Okay, next we have a super long story. It's still kind of ongoing, but I just wanted to cover it with this tweet specifically, but I'll kind of lay out the whole story. So essentially Cloudflare announced earlier this week that they had completely vibe coded a Next.js replacement called vNext, which uses V under the hood, which is some politics that people were really excited about. So it's very interesting because when it first got announced, people were really excited about Cloudflare's release, and they were like, oh, if only Vercel had worked with the V team instead of pushing RS Pack or Turbo Pack, they wouldn't have had this problem. And people were very pro Cloudflare doing this project, and it also spoke to how if you have a test harness within a repo, then you could kind of fork it and create new versions of the product that match all the tests. So Cloudflare launched that. They said they had 94% test coverage, and also CIO.gov, which is the chief information officer of the US government, was using the website, even though it's kind of a static website. They were using the new project of vNext. Then pretty much overnight, there was a full narrative shift. I don't know actually if it was organic or what was driving it, but it was quite swift. So I don't know the exact timeline, but essentially we can see here, Guillermo tweeted that they identified, responsibly disclosed, and confirmed 2 critical, 2 high, 2 medium, and 1 low security vulnerability in Cloudflare's vibe-coded framework, vNext. They believe the security of the internet is the highest priority. And there's another tweet thread where basically they're going back and forth with the CTO. Everyone knows that Vercel and Cloudflare hate each other, but this was kind of the proper explosion that I hadn't seen before. So basically Guillermo called them out and was like, you guys tried to push this out to kind of replace us or show that you can build a web framework that you own. And you bragged saying that it was production ready, even though it has all these vulnerabilities, and it wasn't ready essentially. And then the Cloudflare team, the CTO, and also Rita, who we've read a lot of tweets from before, came back and said, well, we said that we only made it in a week. It's kind of up to you to determine if it's production ready or not. And they were kind of just going back and forth. And then Guillermo basically said, your guys' promotion is possibly the worst security driven or customer driven experience that we've ever seen in tech. So lots of hating back and forth. And then kind of the public narrative shifted as well, where it's now everyone's hating on Cloudflare because they're why are you guys vibe coding Next.js replacements when you have outages constantly? I haven't really been seeing the Cloudflare outages. I know we covered one recently, but people are saying there's been a ton of them. There's a ton of bugs within their system, and it's just a whole mess. So now everyone hates Cloudflare. Everyone's Next is the good guy. And Malta, who is the CTO of Vercel, essentially started calling the vNext project a slop fork, which is basically saying using vibe coding with a public test suite to essentially clone a project or quote unquote fork it, but not through actual forking, but through coding it based on the test suite and just having AI try to adhere to the test suite. So because of that, TLDraw, who we've talked about before, which is an open canvas project, I don't think it's necessarily open source, but it was source available, but they've actually removed their test suite, is my understanding, from their GitHub because, or at least they proposed it because they don't want people essentially slot forking their project where you just take the test suite and recreate it. So very interesting shifts happening. We talked about how people aren't accepting outside PR contributions anymore. TLDraw is one of those projects that's doing that. But now even more people are starting to hide their tests. And it's we're actually kind of going towards more of a closed source system for these commercial open source software pieces. Obviously the real open source software is not going to be affected and actually is really good for AI because, you can always find performance improvements. You can fork it whenever you want. You can have the test cases to demonstrate it. But because so many people are building companies on top of open source, it's actually kind of breaking the hidden idea that people were actually doing this for the sake of the public. Obviously they're doing it for money. All of this is for money. Commercial open source is just trying to get people to use your product because it's quote unquote open source, but no one's going to self-host it because everyone just wants to sign in with Google like we've talked about before. So just a ton of drama. We'll have to stay up to date with this as new things come out, but the Vercel Cloudflare war is on. Okay, next we have a pretty cool release from Vercel talking about their new Chat SDK, which is essentially a SDK that you can build where you define this global bot idea. And as you can see here in the photo, it says the on new mention. So essentially you can define a bot and have its chat features. You can have it connect to your business logic or whatever you want to do with it, but using this framework, this SDK, now you can connect to Slack, GitHub, Teams, Discord, etc., all with one code base, and you don't have to like rewrite all of the handlers and all that. They kind of have that harness on top of it for you, so you can now build like a chatbot slash assistant that connects to all of these different platforms using the Chat SDK. And obviously they got the NPM package chat. I don't know what Vercel is doing behind the scenes. I don't know if they're buying it or leveraging some NPM insider to like steal these names. And if you're building an assistant that you want your users to have access to on whatever platform they're on, this could definitely be a very cool project to look into. And another cool project from Vercel that just got launched, as well as their new autonomous dog fooding. So essentially you can use this dog food package, I believe, or at least this skill with agent browser, which they also have, which is kind of like the smart browser that AI can use to like take screenshots and test different things, or even reproduction videos and step-by-step screenshots. And it's essentially dog fooding. The idea of dog fooding is like you use a product internally so you can see if it works. You can find the edge cases, because usually when people are testing and launching new features, they're only testing the happy path. They're not really testing it extensively, which leads to bugs in production and all these things. So it's cool now. It'll just hit random pages, click buttons, fill forms, test edge cases, check the console, etc. And you can kind of like battle test your project using AI. Obviously, you could just prompt it to do some of these things, but it's cool now that they have this project that you can kind of utilize, and it might have some internal skills as well, or you can utilize it with other skills to make sure that you're testing your project in the way that you want. I don't know necessarily that no manual QA is the future. I do believe that QA, review, all these things are still super important in the age of AI. That's why you need to focus on one project, because even though you're delivering code quickly, you still need the mental model. You still need to understand the user experience, because AI doesn't really have good taste in my experience, or at least like I feel that I have better taste in AI when trying to develop these products. And it's kind of like a collaboration thing as opposed to an AI driving the whole thing, but pretty interesting. You can check it out. And then next we have an announcement from Railway where they've released their new agent skill. So you can have Claude or whoever deploy to Railway. It's one of those things we kind of talked about previously. I'm actually not seeing too many people do it, but maybe it's just becoming normal to people. I'm still not doing anything like this, but the idea of just deploying infrastructure using AI, it's kind of one of those things where it's like we had infrastructure as code. Nobody wants to use the web consoles, obviously, to deploy things. I still can't believe people are even building the web consoles, because it's obviously for toys and just trash. It's not really for production software, but we're at least moving towards a direction where now with Railway apps, you can see that we're kind of going towards a direction where AI will be handling the infrastructure. Obviously, we need like really strict rules to make sure data integrity is there. We're deploying stateless apps. We've been deploying stateless servers forever, so it doesn't really matter if you take down the server, it'll just be down until you redeploy it. But in terms of like data migrations and databases in general, that's where it still gets a bit tricky, and I don't know how much you want to trust agents with it, but we're definitely headed in that direction, so it's pretty interesting. Okay, next we have a ton of drama. I don't even want to go too deep into it. I just want to kind of give you the basic overview. But essentially, the Department of War, previously known as the Department of Defense, hella stupid name, but obviously the US is rabid for war. Nothing new for us since like the 40s. But basically, the Department of War was telling Anthropic that they need to give them full access to the system. And I guess Anthropic was kind of withholding it. There's still some debate on whether or not the Department of War was actually trying to have Anthropic like train a model specifically for like war, kind of like doing what Palantir does in a way, where it's kind of like assisting law enforcement and military with executing their missions. And it was leaked essentially that when they went to Venezuela to capture Maduro, they did use Claude to help plan that mission. So that's pretty interesting. But essentially, Anthropic said that we're not going to comply with you. We're not interested. And then the Department of War came back and said that they've actually classified Anthropic now as a supply chain risk, which is some law that was made in place in like the 50s, I believe, for usually foreign companies, where there was a risk of them obstructing the supply chain to hurt the US. But it's the first time ever, apparently, that it's been used on an American company. And now Anthropic and the government are really on edge. And essentially, OpenAI just swooped in really quickly and they said, hey, we're happy to support the Department of War. I don't really have too much take on this. I know a lot of people in San Francisco and Anthropic employees are really happy with how Anthropic's handled this. Kind of that whole like hackers, anti-establishment kind of vibe, which is cool because that did go away for a while in the tech industry. It was very much like becoming establishment, and it still very is much establishment. But, some of these values, I guess, are still tried and true in the engineering and software development industry. But what's so fascinating is that now on Saturday, February 28th, we've seen that the US launched a bunch of strikes on Iran. And essentially that's why there seems to have been such a big deadline of whether or not Anthropic was going to let them use Claude for this military stuff, is because of this attack that they were essentially going to start. So we'll have to see how all this develops. We already had AI driven war with drones and stuff. So when people talk about like robots fighting wars, like we've already had that for 10 plus years. So it's really nothing new. Obviously it's more advanced now, and possibly like with more hallucinations, that's where it gets a bit scary. But We won't go too deep into this, just very fascinating, and you can check it out more if you're interested. Okay, next we have a tweet from Jack, former CEO and founder of Twitter, and also CEO and founder of Square, now known as Blocks, or Block. And essentially they've announced that they're laying off half the team. They've gone from 10,000 people to just under 6,000, so 4,000 people have been removed. They're giving a very generous severance, about 5 months of severance, 6 months of healthcare. You can keep your device and $5,000 to put towards whatever you need to help you in transition. He goes on a big spiel here, but essentially he's saying just because of AI, we don't need these people anymore. A lot of people are kind of pushing back on that and saying, no, Jack, you've just had these overinflated companies. Like when Elon acquired Twitter, he fired a bunch of the team. I don't know exactly what it was. People are throwing around this number of 30, but it seems like there's only 30 engineers at Twitter, but obviously, or X, but obviously there's more employees than that. I don't know what the exact total count is, but it is interesting. Then also, they announced that Blocks is buying new Bitcoin recently. So there's like jokes about if they just fired these people so that they could have cash to buy the Bitcoin dip. Also, there was like a $60 million party, I guess, that they threw for employees. So, you can't really trust your eyes for a lot of these things, especially when CEOs of public companies especially are putting out statements. But if you just read it on its face, it seems that they have cut their team in half because of AI. And that is kind of scary for the future. But also, you do have to note that it kind of has been like a running joke that Jack's teams and Jack's companies are very overstaffed. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.